That is very amazing right there. And so would you say, actually, this is very interesting because we've had our oil for quite a while, and it's been turned up and down, the other way around, inside out. And would you say this is the right time we'll be having our oil, in fact, so that we do not have to worry about the attacks in Saudi Arabia?
I think it's actually long overdue.
Yes.
Because Uganda made a commercial discovery of oil, crude oil discoveries, in June 2006. That's just about 2 months later. Ghana also made a discovery offshore in Ghana. Now, Ghana started producing oil 3 years later. By end of, I think, 2009, they had started production. And when Uganda made a discovery in 2006, the government indicated that we were likely to have our first barrel of crude oil come out of the ground in 2009. It's 13 years down the road. We haven't seen that oil. And also the recent developments which we've seen with disagreements between the oil companies and the government, raise further uncertainty regarding when Uganda's oil will ever come out of the ground. Because at this point in time, we've been working with projections that we would have oil in 2021. It's certainly not possible.
They've actually said the very first oil is going to come out in 2023. The energy minister the other day said it.
So it's now, the timeline has increased. But until the standstill we have today is resolved, even 2023 is a remote possibility.
So can we blame this on Tello and Total, among the companies that pulled out of the deal? Can we blame all of this on the pulling out, or are there other factors we could actually say are the reasons? Because I think this is a very long time for this oil, since it was discovered, to be still in the works. Yes.
When we made the discovery of oil in 2006, every one of us was excited. And I remember the government organized a day of national prayers on 8th of October 2006. And we were giving thanks to God for remembering us with this resource.
Yes.
And everyone was excited that Uganda was going to become another Saudi Arabia. But there was also a concern that a number of countries in the world have made discoveries of oil, and they have nothing to show for it. So the government, in as much as they wanted the oil to come out, they were also being prudent, because they didn't want to rush.
Yes.
Without setting in place the right legal framework, and then also the right commercialization options. So in 2006, one of the issues that actually created a bit of a contention was the president had initially indicated that all the oil in Uganda had to be refined in Uganda. The oil companies did not agree to that proposition. And they indicated to the president that only having a refinery as a means of monetizing the crude oil we had discovered did not make commercial sense. Because at the peak of production, it's expected Uganda would produce around 30,000 barrels per day. And what Uganda can consume today is, I think, about 60,000 barrels. So you have an excess of 170,000, which cannot be utilized. So it took a bit of time, negotiations and deliberations between the oil companies and the government, and eventually it was settled upon that we have a dual approach, whereby you have a refinery built, but then you also have a crude oil pipeline. So that took a bit of time to resolve. But further to that, tax issues have also been a big challenge in the oil and gas industry. And in 2009, Heritage Oil, which was the first company that discovered oil, expressed their desire to leave Uganda, because for them they had made a discovery and they wanted to sell that and move on. So when they sold their interest to Tullow Oil, the government imposed the capital gains tax of about $640 million. Heritage Oil contended that that tax should never have applied, and it took a bit of time litigating, because there was a case which was filed here in the Tax Appeals Tribunal. Then they also went to international arbitration. Of course, Uganda had the right to tax that, but it elevated our risk profile, because the world keeps monitoring what is happening in terms of the oil and gas world. And when Heritage Oil took on a government, the risk profile of Uganda as a place to invest in increased a bit. And that was not enough, so even Tullow, when it acquired the full interests, it sold off interest to Total and CNOOC. There was also another tax dispute around whether tax needed to have applied or not. Of course, one area where I've written a lot since 2009 has been on the tax regime of Uganda, or oil tax regime.
Yes.
The strides have been made, and the government has worked very hard in trying to come up with a robust tax regime. Of course, over the years, we've seen changes, progressive changes, but there's one area where we still have some issues, and I think the government needs to listen out to the oil companies, or even experts like ourselves in the oil and gas industry. The tax regime on the transfer of oil licenses needs to be reviewed, because the way the oil and gas industry works is that before a country has made a discovery of oil, you're not going to attract the big international oil companies. Yes. It is usually the smaller players like Heritage Oil that come in. And I usually like to give the example of when Heritage Oil came into Uganda in 1997, Uganda was having a war in Western Uganda, ADF rebels. Yes. And I mean, it would be insanity on the side of an investor to invest in a war. So what that means is that the government has to give a lot of incentives to be able to lock in that investment. And that is what happened. And about 3 years ago, I remember some people were blaming the then Minister for Energy who signed those agreements, Honorable Saida Bomba, that the agreements which had been given to the oil companies that came in first were too favorable. But they were looking at it from the perspective of today. No one zoomed back to 1997 to realize that ADF was in Wundivujo, was in Kasese. So you needed to give a bit of incentive. And that's how the oil industry works. The players that come in initially are the smaller players. Now when they make a discovery, certainly everyone in the world gets interested. Yes. And that's how we saw Total, it's one of the biggest companies in the world, and CNOOC get interested because the discovery had been made. And so they asked Heritage Oil and Tullow to sell a bit of stake. So if you have a tax and legal regime that discourages transfer of oil licenses, or technically what you call merger and acquisition transactions in the oil and gas industry, you're indirectly killing the sector, because that is how the bigger players are going to come and partake in the country's sector. And then also one area which sometimes is misunderstood is when you see someone selling an oil license, there's always a perception that, oh, they are making a windfall profit. Okay. It's not usually the case. The reason why all licenses are transferred, sometimes you dilute stake and instead of having 100%, you remain with 30%, is that the oil industry is very risky. In the past, out of every 100 wells which were sunk, only one made a discovery. So what the oil companies devised as a means of mitigating risk was do not take the risk alone. Bring on board other players, yes, so that you're able to share in the risk. So that is one of the reasons why sometimes you have these oil transfers. But again, I might have a license as a company, but I don't have the money to invest further. So usually what happens is that they agree a deal whereby I give you 30% or 50% interest in the license in exchange for you investing in the license.
Okay.
Now, if as a country you tax that money which has been earmarked for investment to develop the license so that oil and gas can be produced, then you're shooting yourself in the foot. And that is why oil companies are asking the government to have another look, because the way the oil tax regime, some aspects are currently structured, is you're actually taxing money earmarked for investment in the sector. So those are some of the issues around tax, which have actually delayed production. And as we speak today, just the other day you saw tallow oil suspend a transaction that was intended to sell more stake to Sinop and Total. And then we also saw a statement issued by Total suspending procurement activities on the East African crude oil pipeline because there's a disagreement with government over tax issues. They're saying the tax regime as it is does not make commercial reason for them to go ahead to produce. And what we've been urging the oil companies and government is to again sit back on the table, because the debate has been mischaracterized. I've seen some people come out and play blame games. Some people are saying the government is being unfriendly to the investors. Some people are saying the oil companies are taking advantage of the companies, and then some people are actually urging on either party to maintain their hardline stance, which misses the point, because it's being turned into an ego fight, which actually shouldn't be. The issue at hand is tax. Does tax affect the project and economics? And it's very easy to determine that if you have an objective discussion.
All right, thank you. That's very, very, very interesting. Well, the U.S. has